Good afternoon. Ooh, it works. Hi. Why is everybody back there in the back? Move up. Because you're going to make Mr. Steppenshaw have to use his outside voice. Move up. Come on. Move up. We don't bite. Move up. There's a whole first. See, I was you in school. I was in the first row. Whole first row here. Lovely packets and nobody's in them. Come move up. Thank you. I appreciate that. Did you meet these two? No, right here. That's Luann. That's Luann. They just said how smart you were, so I wanted to make sure you met them. So good afternoon. I'm Senator Holly Mitchell. Welcome to my hood, the 30th Senate District. I am so glad you're here. This is an important conversation and opportunity for us all to take, and I am glad you navigated LA traffic. Something really special going on out there today. I sat on La Cienega between La Tijera and Rodeo for 50 minutes at 11 o'clock this morning. So I'm not sure what's happening with our city, but it's something big. So I'm glad you all made it, found your way over to Expo Park for a really important conversation. You all know I came from the nonprofit sector. When I first ran for the Assembly in 2010, I was running a large nonprofit, Crystal Stairs. We have a whole Crystal Stairs row here today. And they are here because we all got involved for a second or third generation of involvement with the state budget because of cuts that had been proposed in 2008. The administration at that time proposed a $1 billion cut out of subsidized child care. And we started organizing parents and going to Sacramento and being engaged in the budget process. And because of my experience working in the legislature, working for a member who sat on a budget subcommittee, my experience as a lobbyist with Western Center on Law and Poverty, I had a sense of how to engage in the budget process. But I am clear that most people don't. I think folks generally know how a bill becomes a law. That tends to be a little more transparent. But the budget process can be tricky. It really can. And so we've had budget town halls, several since I was elected. But this year we decided on a little different strategy where we did specific targeted outreach to the nonprofit sector. And those of you who have a different kind of vested interest in understanding the state budget process, how to read it, when to engage, who to engage with, how to know if there are earmarks for nonprofits, as I just heard back in the back of the room. It's important for you to understand, have relationships, and engage. And so that's why we're here today, and we're so glad that you all showed up. There are people in the Capitol, in the legislature, about a dozen, who are the budget gurus, who understand where every dime is, how to access it, how not to. And I am pleased to share with you one of those people today. I've had the pleasure of now chairing the Senate Budget Committee for 3 years, 2 years. No, this is our third budget. 3 years. Come on, Luann. We rely on you to do the math. We got to know 3 years. This is our third budget as chair. This will be my second year as conference committee chair. But I have served on a budget subcommittee every year except one since I've been elected. And that was intentional. That was by design on my part. Because if you've heard me speak, you all know my rap. Our state budget is a value statement. It reflects what's important to us. My CFO at Crystal Stairs told me years ago, Holly, everybody's not broke. And the state, there have been years we have been broke, but we are in the black now, in more ways than one. Haha. We're in the black now, which means we have a healthy general fund. And so the issue is about priorities. Like in all of our household budgets or on your nonprofit balance sheet, we pay for what's most important to us. When I ran Crystal Stairs, I was going to make payroll. I was going to make sure our health benefits were paid, and I was going to stay legal, making sure that I was current in all of the taxes, unemployment insurance, et cetera, right? So as you run your nonprofits, you have your own priorities. And the same applies to us at the state. We have to prioritize and pay for what's most important to us. I listen to my constituents. I go and fight for budget priorities as you tell me that they're important to you and your communities and for the communities that you serve. So to give Mr. Steppenshaw just a sense of who's in the room, Planned Parenthood knows what to do. They wear their shirts. So we are all clear. Planned Parenthood is in the house. Early care and education is in the house. Just if you don't have to give your organization name, just the nature of the work you do. I know representatives from the DD community are in the house. Who else? Okay. Say it again. Okay, so give us the categories, because your name may not tell us. Special needs. Biotechnology. Safety education. Foster children. Health centers. Sickle cell disease, so special interest health needs. Special education. Arts and culture. Say it again. And Fair Chance Project does what? Reentry? So reentry, reentry. Environment? Environment and film. After school. Beautiful. Beautiful. Food insecurity. Environmental, economic, and racial justice. Entertainment.
Economic development, education, public safety, transit.
That's a whole lot. So when disability rights, early care and education. So when you hear all of the issues that are prioritized in the room, this looks like and sounds like the 30th Senate District, quite frankly. You look like and reflect the people we hear from who come and testify in budget hearings on a regular basis. What number budget is this for you?
About 15 or 16.
So he looks younger than he really is. Joe Steppenshaw has worked for Senate budget. He's traveled around. He has landed, and I am proud to say he is staff director for the Senate Budget Committee, Joe Steppenshaw. He knows his stuff. This is his 15th budget. Most importantly, from my perspective, he's a dad. He's a dad to Sylvia, and I'm just going to leave Jack out, and Jack. And I share that because all of us bring our own lens and real-life perspective to the work we do every day. All of you here in this room are doing the work you do every day based on some life experience, some perspective. And Mr. Steppenshaw and I bring our real-life experience as parents, as children of aging parents, as nonprofit execs. All of that we bring to the work we do every day on your behalf with regard to the state budget. So we've got a PowerPoint for you to give you the lay of the land in terms of season, what's in the budget, the process, and we're going to have a standing mic here because we want to open it up for questions to make sure that we get to all of your issues. We're being live streamed, and so people who weren't able to get here today could certainly tune in, and you can go back and actually watch it or refer to other people to it. I think it's going to be on my website. Somebody will tell us before we're all done. So, fair enough? You ready to get started? California State Budget 101, Joe Steppenshaw, you're on. Steppenshaw, you're on. Thank you.
All right, hi everybody. I'm happy to be here today in my chair's district. She usually doesn't let me out of the Capitol. She keeps me locked up in there most of the time. So finally got to get out here and see the LA weather and sunshine. So it's a nice little break for me. So as Senator Mitchell mentioned, the presentation today is just to give a high-level overview of the budget calendar process, and then a little context on the current budget to hopefully give folks a better understanding of, number one, what the budget is, what the process is, and how folks can engage in the budget, especially folks who are not in Sacramento all the time. And I would say too, you know, as Senator Mitchell kind of alluded to, even in Sacramento, 90% of the people who work in the Capitol are working in the normal policy bill process. And there's a lot of staffers and people in the building who don't even really, truly know how the budget works and when to engage and how they can even get things in the budget or track budget issues. So it's a very important part of the work that we do in Sacramento, and I'm happy to be here to give an overview today. So as the Senate Budget Committee, our main function is to review the governor's budget, and then through our budget and subcommittee process to make revisions, additions to that budget, and then eventually we will, that will lead to us adopting a Senate version of the state budget. And then after that, we'll negotiate with the Assembly and the administration to eventually develop and then enact the final state budget for every year. So starting off, there are really three high-level key dates to our process, and the presentation is kind of outlined around these three. The first one is the release of the governor's budget every year, and that's required to be released by January 10th, by January 10th. The second one is a May revision, which is May 14th, and this is kind of the last major update to the governor's budget that he presents to the legislature, and it's really after that that all the final decisions are made. And then lastly, June 15th is when the legislature is required to pass a budget bill for the next fiscal year. So the governor's budget, as mentioned, the governor is constitutionally required to release a proposed budget for the next fiscal year on January 10th. Our fiscal years, state fiscal years, are different than the normal calendar years as they run from July 1st through June 30th of every year. So this January 10th, the new governor, Governor Newsom, presented a budget to the legislature for the next fiscal year, which starts this coming July 1st, and which is the 2019-20 fiscal year. We're currently in the 2018-19 fiscal year, which began July 1st, 2018. The governor's budget usually reflects the governor's priorities. This is having Governor Brown the last 8 years. We have a somewhat new approach that was taken by Governor Newsom, where he released a budget in January that really reflected a lot of the priorities that the legislature has had the last decade or so, and it particularly has had budget priorities and advocated for and included some in the budget the last couple years. And so it's a kind of a different dynamic where a large part of this year will be kind of working off of shared priorities with this administration, but to make sure that the legislature is able to put its stamp on those and make sure that the details of those priorities align with the legislature's priorities and values. So after the governor releases his budget, the legislative process kind of is mirrored in both houses. Both the Senate and Assembly have budget committees, and then they each have subcommittees. So the typical process will be after the January 10th budget is released, we will hold in the Senate a series of high-level overview hearings of major issues in the governor's budget. We just got done yesterday with the last of our opening full committee budget hearings that we held over this last month plus. We did a hearing on just a high-level overview of the entire budget. We did a hearing regarding the governor's budget proposals for wildfires and emergency response. We did a hearing on the governor's reserve debt payment liability proposals. We did a hearing on the governor's Medi-Cal and pharmaceutical proposals, and we finally finished up yesterday with a hearing on the governor's homelessness and housing proposals. And so after those and those are just high-level discussions to kind of set the stage for a lot of the major topics that will be discussed during the rest of the process during the budget subcommittees. And the budget subcommittees are really where the governor's proposals are vetted in detail, and we have that really thorough, or the opportunity for really thorough discussion. And it's important to note that because this is really the main point for a public discussion of the budget issues. So this is key for stakeholders to know when your issues are going to be heard in budget subcommittees. And even if you don't have specific issues that are being proposed by the governor that you know are going to be heard, but you do have budget issues that are related to a overarching issue like in human services or in healthcare, and you want that to be included, then you need to know when those topics are going to come up in the budget subcommittees, and you need to start engaging with the different committee staff and members, particularly the subcommittee chairs, to see if there's an opportunity to fold your issues into those discussions. So with that, the subcommittees, you can see, are broken down by issue area, and the list here also provides the members that are the chairs of each budget subcommittee, both in the Senate and the Assembly.
What's the best way for people to know if an item they're interested in is going to be on an agenda and when? How can they find that out if they're LA based?
So first, kind of getting ahead in the presentation, but that's okay. That's all right. That's all right. Now you got no. So that's why it's important to know who the players are, and in this instance, it's knowing who the subcommittee staff are. So we, as the staff director in Senate Budget, I am lucky enough to have a set of very experienced professional staff who are all experts in their particular areas. I just know a little bit about everything, enough to be dangerous, but my consultants are really the experts in their particular areas. So for each one of these subcommittees, it's typically 2 consultants who really focus on that subcommittee. Sub 1, for instance, we have a K through 12 consultant, and we have a higher ed consultant. And so knowing who those consultants are in both subcommittees and being able to reach out to get information from them is important. But if you don't have time to go to that level, then you could always go to the committee's websites that have the agendas of every subcommittee, and every committee hearing are on the websites of both the Senate Budget Committee and the Assembly Budget Committee. You could also check the daily file of both houses, which lists the dates and times and subjects of all the hearings of both houses, not only the budget hearings, but also the policy committee hearings. So that's the way to find out that level of information. Any other questions? So moving on. So just as a highlight of the other key players in our budget process, the Department of Finance is the governor's chief fiscal advisor. They develop the governor's budget, and then they also participate throughout our process. So every budget hearing that we have for the full budget committee, and then the subcommittees, they testify and present at those committee hearings and defend or explain the governor's position or proposals for each particular issue. Then also the Legislative Analyst's Office is our nonpartisan fiscal advisor. They provide very good analysis and overviews, context of all the major issues in the budget, and then usually also provide some recommendations or options that could be considered, either if it's adopting what the governor is proposing or other alternatives that they think the legislature should consider. Going back to the Department of Finance, I would also note that it's very important to keep in mind that for stakeholders, getting the administration to include whatever issue that you have in their budget is probably the best thing anybody can do in terms of ensuring that you have, setting yourself up to have the best chance of that, of your issue being included in the final budget. The administration builds their budget usually in the fall. So as soon as our session ends, they're really ramping up. In the fall, September, October, departments are submitting budget change proposals to the Department of Finance. Department of Finance is vetting all of those proposals. They're developing the governor's budget, getting it prepared for release in January. They're really just buttoning it up like in December. So knowing that we're at that stage of the process and always seeking opportunities to insert yourself or be engaged, it's harder than coming to the legislature, but people do it, and just recognizing having the administration champion your issue gives you the best chances of having that actually cross the finish line when the final budget is passed out of both houses on June 15th every year. And lastly, note that both Department of Finance and LAO provide the revenue estimates that the state's budget is based off of. And they each do it twice a year. The LAO usually does a fiscal outlook in November, where they do an update of revenue estimates at that time. The Department of Finance does their revenue estimates for January 10th that the January 10th budget is based off of. And then both the LAO and Finance release revenue estimates in May for the May revision. And those usually are what are used by the legislature in order to really try and hone in on what the final framework in terms of how much resources are actually available for the budget that we're building, of what that is. And so it's very important to understand those estimates and how we get them and how they play into the state's levels of resources every year. So that gets right into the May revision, which is the final update from the governor of his governor's budget. There's one other time on April 1st where the governor does present revisions to his budget to the legislature. And so that's also an opportunity if your issues aren't addressed in the governor's budget, or if there are some things in the governor's budget that you like but think, oh, those, there should be tweaks or those things, don't only let the legislature know, you still have opportunities to let the administration know, and there are still opportunities to have the administration change their proposals. And so they do that in April. They submit letters on April 1st to the legislature, and then they do that lastly at the May revise. And the May revise is the big revision, and again, that's based on those final revenue updates in May. And they usually are supposed to just be adjustments to things that are driven by revenue or caseload driven, like Prop 98, prisons budgets, caseload driven programs within Health and Human Services. But I'm sure a lot of you are aware, this, especially in recent history, the administration has really used the May revision to also introduce new significant policy proposals, which has not given the legislature a lot of time to react and weigh in on those proposals, and is led to us having to negotiate over some very significant proposals within a short time frame. So after the May revision, the subcommittees of both houses will take actions to close down the budget. They do take some actions prior to the May revision, but for most actions, we wait till after We know what the final framework is, what the final revenues are. And so for most of the proposals, including the significant proposals, after the May revision, both houses will take actions in the subcommittees to close down their versions of the budget, go to the full committee, adopt a budget from each house out of the full committee, and then the Senate and the Assembly will enter into conference committee to hash out the differences between the houses. As Senator Mitchell mentioned, as the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, she's going to be the chair of the conference committee this year, and we alternate every year. Last year, the chair of the Assembly Budget Committee was the chair of the conference committee. So that's the time for the houses of legislature to work out their differences in the budget, to hopefully agree on a final budget, to then negotiate with the administration. What's kind of evolved over these last couple years is, given the condensed time frame that we have between May revision and having to adopt a final budget, often those final negotiations with the administration are taking place during conference committee. So we come out of conference committee with a final budget that's agreed to by the legislature and the administration. And so for the finals mentioned earlier, the legislature is required to pass a budget by June 15th of every year. The governor has 12 days to sign the bill, some ability to veto. Because of the fact that we've been able to work out agreements through the conference committee, three-way agreements the last couple of years, there haven't been any vetoes. And then the important note is the budget is an urgency measure, which means it goes into effect immediately, so it will be operative on July 1st when the new fiscal year begins and folks need to start accessing the funds for that fiscal year. Finally, a not insignificant part of the budget is budget trailer bills, which are statutory changes that are necessary to implement the Budget Act. So there are typically a host of budget trailer bills that actually make changes to state law every year that accompany the Budget Act, and those also are urgency measures and take effect immediately. This next slide just provides some additional context kind of around the parameters that kind of shape what we're working in. And these are propositions that have impacted the budget. Prop 98, I'm sure most folks are aware of, which is the minimum guarantee for K through 14 education. And that basically, complicated formulas, but basically it results in about 40% of general fund revenues every year being dedicated to K through 14 education. Prop 25 was a big one for our process, because prior to Prop 25, we needed a 2/3 vote to pass the budget. And I was a staffer there for the Assembly Budget Committee during those times. Senator Mitchell was a sub-chair in this Assembly for the Assembly Budget Committee. And particularly during the recession, those were the days where we, year after year, set a new record in terms of delays in having a state budget enacted, going to September to October, having to do multiple budgets a year. A big part of that was driven by the recession, but also, the complexities and difficulties in getting a 2/3 consensus to actually pass a budget. Spend nights in the Capitol. Members wouldn't be allowed to leave the floor. I'd sleeping on the floor in a tiny room, but so this was huge. It wasn't pretty. It was huge for the process. Since Prop 25 has passed, the state has not had a budget that was not enacted on time. Prop 26 also, same year as Prop 25, is significant on the side of the ability of the state to actually raise revenue, basically making the definition of a tax a lot stricter. So most things that raise taxes or fees now are considered taxes and require a 2/3 vote to actually pass. The other one I do want to note that which is very significant is Proposition 2 in 2014. Prior to Proposition 2, we did have a state rainy day fund, a budget stabilization account, but there was there were no deposits actually made into it. And so we didn't have a state reserve. And we knew going through the Great Recession, over the few years of the Great Recession, the state budget actually lost about $115 billion and had no reserve other than our normal operating balance we thought we had the first year we went in, but just got wiped away. So without any reserve, there was no backstop. And so one of the biggest solutions, along with other things, to dealing with this loss in revenue was having to cut programs. And I think folks, not only for members, especially the members who are elected officials there who have to actually vote to make those hard decisions, but even at a staff level of having to go through there and really try to figure out what the options are, which is choosing from a bunch of bad options and seeing, really understanding the impacts that this was going to have on real life people. I think the folks, especially folks who realize we never want to go through that situation again, and understanding the value of having a reserve to protect programs, especially when a lot of people say, well, you have billions of dollars there, it should be spent on, it should be going out to support or help programs or people now, or you have billions of dollars there, you should send it on the other side of the argument, you should send it back to the people. We understand well that that money is very important to actually sustaining programs and making sure people are not negatively impacted in times that we have an economic downturn, which we know is going to come. And to that point, the normal economic cycles, every 5 years, there's going to be a downturn. We're now entering the 10th year of the recovery. And so Governor Brown used to always warn, it's coming, it's coming. Things are we're not at that point yet, but we always have to keep in mind that it will come, and it just, I think it's better for everybody that if we're prepared. So this is kind of just recap some of what I've mentioned earlier, and where I was going to note when Senator Mitchell jumped the gun on me on this. But just on the engagement is that I mean, just number one, just know who your representatives are. You know, be present, contact their district offices, at Sacramento offices, and make sure, I think it's important, and even in the Capitol, I have to remind folks all the time, if you're talking to folks in the Assembly, talk to folks in the Senate, and vice versa, because it just makes your job easier at the end of the day if you're making sure that you're educating both houses, and you're the one who's doing that, and you're not just doing it on one side, and expecting them to then do the education and engagement on the other side for you, because that doesn't really always work in your best interest. So, and then also to keep the key players informed. Again, the Department of Finance, the administration, as to the extent you can, always encourage, reach out to them. I know it's always a little bit harder to figure out how to do it, but just doing that. And I see the folks that have been successful in doing that. It really works out. It can work out to your benefit, and it's just important to keep them involved. And then at, even at a higher level, even if they're not the ones who are going to take your priority and put it in their budget, whatever, it always is helpful if you've already reached out to them, and at least folks are aware of what you're proposing, or have seen your proposal or your ask before and say, have some idea. So if the Senate is reaching out to them or the Assembly is, and it's already on their radar, it just helps the chances of something like that being included in the budget surviving. So then also the legislative analysts. The other thing I was going to say earlier was to make sure that you use them as a resource. They do a great job of providing some high-level context of all the budget issues on their website. They do a series of reports, and so you can always check for, see if there's updates, but they already have reports on the education proposals, some of the natural resources proposals, a whole host of the proposals that that are already in the governor's budget are on their website, just on the front page. You can go there, you can see them, and they do a really good job kind of laying out the lay of the land around any particular budget topic. And then lastly, in terms of engagement, was just to make sure that you're participating in the process. Again, the subcommittees are the time for the public vetting of these issues, and it's important if you really want to be part of the discussion, to be there, provide the public comment, but then also do that work beforehand and have already reached out to the committee consultants and to whoever in Sacramento that you think might be engaged in certain issues, whether it be, besides the committee consultants, it should also be the subcommittee chair's office and any other members that might be your representatives or that you know are engaged in whatever particular issue that you're up there to advocate for. So this last part was just to provide a overview, high-level overview of the current budget, the current governor's budget that was proposed on January 10th that we're currently working off of, just to give some context of the state budget overall. So the proposed 2019-20 budget is a total of $209 billion. That amount includes federal funds, bond funds, special funds, and most of those are all kind of already earmarked for a purpose through whatever the programs that came from the feds, through the fee that they were raised through. So when we're really talking about the decision points that are made on how to prioritize our spending, we're really talking about the general fund. And the general fund portion of the governor's proposed budget is $144.2 billion. To give some context, I think coming out of the recession in 2011-12, we were like a little over 80-something billion dollars in general fund spending. So we've increased significantly in the last few years, even though we know, and especially going through the set of overview hearings on covering not only the Medicare fund docs, but Medi-Cal fund docs, but the 3.5 million Californians who still don't have health coverage, or addressing the severe housing and homelessness needs out there that even with the amount that we've been able to reinvest and build since the recession, that the needs out there still far outpace our resources. And so it's still tough decisions on really figuring out how to have the biggest impact within the resources that we do have. So again, the reserves I touched on earlier because of the required payments for Prop 2. That really got us thinking, I think, in a different way too, because beyond the required payments, we've actually made supplemental payments to our reserves in the last couple of years. And so with that, we've basically gone from prior to 2014, without having a backstop for economic downturns, to now having a budget that is proposing to have $15.3 billion in the rainy day fund by the end of the year. Also $1.8 billion in our regular reserve, which is basically the balance in our operating budget, and it's what we pay for emergency expenses during the year, like fires, responsive fires, and those types of things. And then lastly, of note, the safety net reserve would have $900 million in it. And this is something that was championed and added by the Senate last year during the budget process to create an additional state reserve that had money set aside specifically for CalWORKS and Medi-Cal, two programs that we know are countercyclical in that the demand on those programs go up as the economy goes down. And so we thought it was important to develop another mechanism to protect those programs in particular during economic downturns. And this new administration is proposed to actually make an additional deposit into that reserve of $700 million. So there will be a balance of $900 million in that reserve in the coming fiscal year. So this next slide is just a pie chart that gives a general overview of where our revenues come from, the general fund revenues, where they come from. And as you can see, our state is heavily reliant on personal income taxes. About 70% of our state general fund now comes from personal income taxes. Second highest is sales and use tax, and then corporations taxes is third highest. But really, as you can see, we're relying on personal income taxes. This has evolved over time. I think if you went back to the 1950s, this portion would have been the sales and use tax, and they've kind of went like that ever since then. And I think it's important to note here, a lot of times you may hear folks talk about tax reform, the need for tax reform, because our revenues are so volatile. I think, the other side of that is it's a progressive system. We are relying on personal income taxes, and as folks make more money, and the wealthy make more money, they're paying more taxes into the state's coffers, and again, a way to balance against the volatility is to build the state's reserves. And then this next chart is just education, how our main programs that our general fund supports. Again, about 40% goes through K through 12 education. The next biggest kind of, if you combine them, is health and human services, higher ed, corrections, rehabilitation, and then natural resources and other. Natural resources has a small slice here because most of their funding comes from bond funds and some special funds. And then lastly, this chart just gives a breakdown of the programs that this governor has targeted in his first budget proposal. And it breaks them down by one-time and ongoing amounts. As you can see, some of the one-time priorities were in early care and education, and also in responding to housing and homelessness issues. Some of the ongoing priorities were higher ed and some of the human services programs, particularly CalWORKS increases. As I mentioned earlier, the issues that this governor has chosen to prioritize have been things that a lot of our members have championed the last few years. And so this is, I think, from our point of view, a good start to a budget conversation to have this year. With that, I'll turn it back over to the senator to answer all the questions.
They've asked me to use the mic since we're live streaming. Joe, go back to the slide, this one that shows the 1920 budget. And that's an important slide for everybody to really take a look at, because I can't tell you how many times, well, the LA Times did a story, might have been during my Crystal Stairs period that polled people and asked people, where do you think the lion's share of the state budget goes? And public response was like the exact inverse of reality. Everybody thinks we spend all the money on corrections and no money on K through 12. California used to be number 1 and now it's number 55. Well, only 50 states, but okay. And so it's important that we all understand the truth about where the money really goes. Prop 98 created a scenario in which K through 12 will always get a good lion's share of the pie. So I think that's an important slide that you and all of your friends and colleagues in the nonprofit sector, but all of us need to really have a reality-based perspective of where the money goes. I'm trying to get to my notes right quick here. Propositions. You'll also hear the term ballot box budgeting. You know, there are good ballot initiatives and some not so good. We all have our history and experience with the referendum and the ballot initiative process. What is frustrating to me is through ballot box budgeting, it has really limited the percentage of the overall budget pie that the legislature and the governor has control over. So thanks to Prop 98, some very well-meaning people said, we're not spending enough money on education, we're going to change that, we're going to create this ballot initiative. And so now, because you can only change your ballot initiative with another one, how many cents of every dollar? A certain percent of every new dollar that comes into the general fund must go through K through 14 education. That's great and all, but there are years where we are hemorrhaging in other areas of the budget. And as a resident of the state of California, I elect my representatives, and I want them to have the power to, in real time, make decisions about what's best for California at that time. And through these initiatives, you've limited my ability to do that. Thanks to Prop 98, X% of every new dollar must go to K through 14. See what I'm saying? So the slice of the pie that we have control over gets smaller and smaller as we continue as voters to engage in ballot box budgeting. So I'm not going to suggest that you have the same attitude as I do about the referendum process, but at least I would ask you, many of you who are running nonprofits, who are relying on some of these resources, to at least when you're approached by people to qualify something for the ballot, ask them the question. Understand what you are signing and what you are getting to qualify for the ballot.
Can I add something
Yes.
there? Because it just remind me of a current issue that I've actually heard a lot of is cannabis. Is that we should spend the cannabis revenue on X, Y, or Z. The initiative was very prescriptive on how that money is spent. But it's a perfect example is that the legislature does not have control over how that money was spent. It was prescribed in the initiative, and for some good programs, as Senator Mitchell alluded to, but when folks are asking or suggesting that that's a new revenue source that could be spent on X, Y, or Z, not exactly.
Because once the language is qualified, you get enough signatures and it's qualified for the ballot, we don't have the power as a legislature to change it. It takes another vote of the people to change the vote of the people. We introduce bills, budget trailer bills, to change, policy every day. We have that flexibility and power, but not through the referendum process. And so that's a perfect example. Folks calling me, well, I voted on it and I want the money to go here. Well, then you should have looked at what you voted on and signed, because then you would know that the money can't go there. So it is challenging as a policymaker when we continue to limit the section of the budget, the general fund that we have control over. Timeliness. I can't emphasize this more. You saw those first 3 dates. Joe gave you a great suggestion on trying to get involved on the front end with the administration. The budget is not the place where you can wake up on June 16th and have an aha moment about what needs to be in the budget. And if you do, please don't call and share it with me. Because based on that budget schedule, I will be exhausted. We will have gotten the budget done June 15th. And so I know I ran nonprofits. I know that that doing the work you do every day is all-consuming. I get it. And not everyone has the luxury to have advocacy or external affairs people who can track that for you. I get it. But the budget is where we have the least amount of flexibility with regard to time. And the later you call me, or any of your elected officials, it limits our ability to be helpful to you. So you can't call or ask late if you want to be a savvy budget advocate. Timeliness with regard to the budget is really, really important. I know it sounds overwhelming, so let me give you just 3 little shortcuts. The Senate budget website, phenomenal. To get amazing kind of quick reads, I shouldn't say quick reads, but one place you can go to get a comprehensive view on a budget or policy issue is on their website in these agendas. The agendas they've developed are amazing resources. I tell all new legislators, go to the budget staff and ask them for their back agendas on these policy areas, because it's the perfect primer to get up to speed on a policy or budget issue. The agenda Joe's staff put together yesterday for the homeless and housing hearing, worth its weight in gold, because it was one place you could go and find out what the legislature has done over the past 3 or 4 years and how that's all rolling out. The Ledge Analyst's Office, as chair of the Senate Budget Committee, that makes me chair of the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. The LAO reports to that committee. We had a retirement, so we had to hire a new LAO. There have only been 5 or 6 LAOs in the history of the LAO. California was the first legislature to create a Ledge Analyst's Office, and the Federal Center on Budget, no, it's not the center, the federal, what's the federal office? The Congressional Budget Office was fashioned off of California's LAO. And so we've only had 4 or 5, and so we had to hire a new LAO. It was a big deal. We did a national search to find someone with the skill set to bring to the legislature their nonpartisan perspective on all things fiscal. So looking at the LAO and the amazing research and reports they produce on fiscal programs, fiscal policies, they do an analysis, an independent analysis of the governor's budget once it's released. And the legislature relies very heavily on the perspective and this experience of the LAO in helping guide us. Department of Finance works for the governor. Sometimes we want another set of eyes. You know how you say go get a second opinion. You want a second set of eyes to look at those numbers and provide you a perspective. And that's the role the LAO provides us. Website, you should take a look at what the LAO produces as well. Lastly, I would say it's important as nonprofits, you all go deep in your own issue area. But to be a real budget advocate and a budget player, you should take some time to understand other strains on the budget. If you do education, look at corrections or health. If you do health, look at higher ed or natural resources. It just makes you, I think, a better advocate in terms of the work you do when you come to talk to the legislature. So when you go to talk to my vice chair in the Senate Budget Committee, Senator Nielsen, who represents the part of California that's been hit the hardest by the fires, you have a sense of his perspective. You have a sense of his perspective. Because when I sat there as an Angelino in that hearing to hear about 147 million dead trees in California, and the however many millions of tons of debris that we have to remove for the whole communities, whole cities that have been decimated by these fires, it gave me a different perspective on the magnitude of what I was watching on the news. debris removal, an entire community, how we have to figure out how to deal with all of the toxic debris that's left behind by fires that ravage whole communities and run that hot. And so learn some of the other areas. It will make you a better, more well-rounded advocate as you go to talk to legislators about what's important to you, that you understand the other strains and impacts on the overall state budget. Because as I tell my 18-year-old on a regular basis, it's not all about you. It's not. I've been an advocate most of my professional career, and we can get in our space and think it's all about us. It is not. There are other slices to that pie that don't touch the work you do, and I think to be better advocates, it's important that you know all of them. The last thing I just want to share, and I think we're probably going to do an email, e-blast from our office. There's an advocacy training workshop that's going to take place on March 15th, 9 a.m. at Holman United Methodist Church, right down the street, Church of the Bells on Adams. You know, when you run nonprofits, you're balancing, we're concerned about protecting our nonprofit status and how far can we go in our advocacy work. And the nonprofit I worked at before I went to Crystal Stairs, I went to one of these trainings and really understood that what I had understood for many years was not the truth, that there are lots of activities you can engage in as you educate policymakers to engage in the legislative process. And so if you're here in the budget workshop, that's good, you understand how this is important to you. But consider going to that training so you understand that there really is a line that the IRS draws, but you have a responsibility to the people and communities you serve to really do all that you can to advocate on their behalf. So just as a fellow nonprofit person, I strongly encourage you to know what the law is and know what you can do safely and appropriately within the confines of your nonprofit status. And this is a workshop. We're not sponsoring it, but it's an organization that I've encouraged that they do these kinds of things to train nonprofit leaders across the state. So I hope you'll consider it. It's March 15th, 9 a.m. at Holman, and we're probably going to do a flyer or something. I don't know if there's an RSVP, but call my office if you have any questions. With that, there's a mic here in the middle. Please come on up, tell us who you are and the organization you represent and what questions you have.
Hi, I'm Richard Ayub with Project Angel Food here in Los Angeles. And I heard a rumor.
Tell everybody what Project Angel Food does.
Project Angel Food is about to celebrate our 12 millionth meal this year. It's very exciting. We were born in response to the AIDS crisis in 1989, sending love in the form of food to people dying of AIDS. Today, we send medically tailored meals to anyone who is sick, hungry, and alone. And we're serving 1,400 people a day. And thanks to the senator, we are getting some state funding for a pilot that is proving that our healthy meals can bring down healthcare costs. And we are thrilled about that. That's a big deal. So the question is, I heard that there's a rumor that there's some money earmarked for capital in Southern California for capital campaigns. Is that correct, Joe?
He asked me and I said, I have never heard of that in my entire life. Ask Joe Steppenshaw. So it's earmarked for any kind of capital campaign for a
capital
nonprofit.
campaign, for remodeling, for new buildings, stuff like that.
For non-governmental entities or for,
Yes.
I am not aware of that.
So you go back to that
Yeah.
rumor mill and say, come to the workshop next year because you got that wrong. Now, what the governor did include in the budget was capital for child care facilities.
It was infrastructure for the CSU, which could also be used for childcare, and other infrastructure requests that's been part of bonds.
Luann, everybody meet Luann Nguyen from my capital office. Luann, come give the answer on the mic so you'll be a part of the live stream. Short answer is no. Go to that mic, yes, and give the response.
There's been various bonds that have been issued over the year from the state, and part of the budget process is approval of the money for how the bonds will be used. So there's a couple of pieces like that in the budget, but with respect to the community college, the CSU, the UCs, there's infrastructure money there for them. And for the CSU particularly, that infrastructure money can also be used in the context of child care facilities.
On site,
Yes,
on the CSU campus.
yes. So there's that, and that's just a proposal.
Go ahead.
And if you look on the last slide too, that has the overview of the major proposals in the governor's budget, the top line, 750 million is for full-day kindergarten. That's really to retrofit classrooms. And then the second one is for child care facilities too. So, so it's another source for that. But yes, I'm not aware of any earmark for just for capital projects in Southern California.
And you know, even the terminology earmarks you hear at the congressional level. We don't even use the term earmark necessarily with regard to the state budget. There will be individual legislators that might have a project in their district that they advocate for. For example, the Science Center is in my district, and so I have advocated to support the Science Center. In fact, the Science Center needs a new ADA compliant elevator. I mean, that's something that I will, you know, try to take and make a priority through the budget process. So sometimes individual members will advocate for a project in their district, but we don't even use the terminology earmark at the state level. Yes.
Hi, I'm a constituent, and I'm with a private company where we benefit from cap and trade money, and we file for low carbon fuel standard credits, which is an amazing program. It's very efficient. I wanted to ask your strategy or advice with the Senate versus Assembly committees on transportation. Do I kind of keep track of both, or which one is the gatekeeper? I mean, I write a lot of support letters and comment letters, but I would like to just sort of monitor a little bit more.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, it's both, and there's no one that's going to have more influence than the other.
Okay.
We're both working on versions of the state budgets that are equally as important and
Okay.
equally influential.
Okay.
So it's both.
Okay.
And we talked about the conference committee process. So, you know, the Senate will pass a budget, the Assembly will pass a budget. The point of the conference committee is that we bring the two budgets together to come out with one to go to the governor. And more often than not, the Senate and the Assembly budgets are different. There's something that may be included in one that's not included in the other, and we go to conference to rectify that. Sometimes we accept the Senate version, the Assembly version. So, conventional wisdom would suggest that if you lobby both and your item is in both budgets, guess what?
Okay.
You don't go to conference and you're in like Flynn,
Okay.
typically, unless you're pulled out. But that's politics.
Thank you.
So that's why you really have to work both houses.
Hello. First and foremost, I want to thank you too, both of you, for being here today. Man, I'm trying to wrap my head around.
I know, it's a lot.
what's being said today, and I appreciate you. I admire you. I've been to your Christmas in July.
Thank
Helped you
you.
out a lot.
Thank you.
And as I said, I work in reentry, and I first began with FACTS, Families to Men California Through Strike, because I was a through-striker. And when the lifers started writing this, I started dealing with the lifers coming home after serving 30 and 40 years through Fair Chance Project. But I was with Kim McGill for a long time, and Youth Justice Coalition go to Sacramento often.
Yes.
And she write bills, support bills, oppose bills, and
She
she
does.
do it. Man, I mean, she's very, very smart, and creative, and I never really got behind her because it's all a youth-led movement, and I'm dealing with adults. And I'm dealing with people that's on parole, can't go to Sacramento, can't, you know what I'm saying, to raise their voices is like Kim does with the youth. But now I'm seeing that I think it is important with the formerly incarcerated men and women that's coming home, because we got kids out here that has no role models.
That's
really
true.
to follow through. But we're trying to build a mentorship program, but the assembly proposals I supported was 66, 3 strikes. 36, 3 strikes. You know, and of course, Senate bills, Assembly bills, and Kim has drafted and supported and opposed. Who I'm trying to get an understanding right now about the proposition. Then you have the Senate bill. Then you have Assembly bill.
Yes.
Okay. So if you can help me break that down, that how would I be able to like draft Assembly bill, or would it take a Assembly member?
So, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I bet 3/4 of the people in the room have the same question.
Okay.
So, a proposition is when you're at Target or wherever and somebody comes over to you with a petition. Do you want a clean, safe California? Sure, sign here. We as registered voters can get something on the ballot to become law by qualifying something for the ballot. So when you sign those petitions, they have to collect so many signatures to get it on the ballot. So that's how something can become law. That doesn't go through the legislature. The propositions that were listed there, Prop 187, Prop 8, think of all the propositions over the history. They don't come through the legislature. That's the citizens' ability to get something on the ballot to become law. Secondly, Assembly bills or Senate bills, an AB or an SB. It's an AB if it starts in the Assembly as the House of Origin. It's an SB if it starts in the Senate. Yes, we have sponsors. There are organizations here who have sponsored bills, meaning they had an idea. Senator Mitchell, this is the law. This is the way we think it should change. And they'll come to me with a concept. Would you be willing to carry it? That makes me the author of the bill, and you would be the sponsor of the bill. Yes, you may write some language, but we go to some place called Ledge Counsel, which is a whole staff of attorneys who actually put it in legalese that you see printed in bills. So sponsors don't have to bring all that exact language to us. We have a crew of attorneys who will make it the law, okay? So that's an Assembly bill, a Senate bill. Now the budget is a bill too. The budget will have a bill number, and we'll have the budget bill, we'll have Budget Junior, we'll have a variety of different bills. The budget bill itself has the money in it, the actual allocations. How we spend the money comes in what we call trailer bills, and there are dozens of them. I appreciate you say you're trying to wrap your head around it, and the way we talked about there are people who work in Sacramento who really don't follow the budget. This is complex, and for me, the reason we do these town halls is I don't want us to use the fact that it's complex to keep real people out of the process and the equation. That's why we do these town halls. That's why Joe comes down here, because we want to make it as accessible and tangible and understandable as possible, because it impacts your everyday life. Whatever we end up voting, however those pie slices are adjusted, more to K through 12, less to corrections, whatever, those are decisions that we'll make as members of the Budget Committee, members of the legislature, and we'll all have to live with them. So that's why we want you educated, informed, and engaged to help us and bring your suggestions and ideas to us so we know how we can make it happen. And we also are conscious of why we do town halls here in the district, because we know everybody can't get to Sacramento. We get that. And so the fact that you're here, the next time I want you to bring some of the men and women that you work with. I'm going to have you take some of these extra folders in the front row back to them and talk them through the process and let people see what you saw. And so we can begin the process of educating every member of our community about the process that impacts them every day. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Mitchell, for having this. My name is Thomas Lee. I'm the Executive Director of Friends LA. Encourage all of you in the room, go to friendsla.org. So I'm here representing children impacted by the foster care system. And what we do at Friends LA is really unique and new. We launched a year ago, and what we do in essence is we take full-time, professional, salaried mentors, pair them with a child somehow connected or experiencing the foster care system, and we mentor that child from kindergarten, 4 hours a week, 16 hours a month, in the classroom as well as in the home, from kindergarten to high school graduation. It's a 12-plus year mentoring commitment that we make to each child. And so here in LA, because we have the largest child welfare system in the country, we're focusing on children in foster care, those at imminent risk of going into foster care, and also the children of parenting foster youth. A little more than 40% of all foster care that age out of the system, they have children by the time they turn age 21. And so we're trying to prevent the cyclical nature of foster care with our mentoring program. So with that said, there's a couple of bills, as well as Proposition 56, that I'd love to know if you're supporting. Can we get your support? And then also, how can we figure out how to leverage them locally? Because I think if there's any place in California, we need to make sure we know how grassroots organizations as well as large systems all are working together to make sure those investments made at the state level are getting to the kids that need them. So for example, SB 219, the pilot about extracurricular activities for foster children. There's so many children that have incredible talents, but there's not enough money or mobility to get them connected to it, so they often miss out on what we make sure we give our own children, which is really ridiculous. The other one's AB 340, and AB 340 is really important because that deals with early childhood screenings. You know, the governor just named Nadine Burke Harris as the Surgeon General.
Yes.
And so again, how can we utilize some of those early childhood screenings, looking at those adverse childhood experiences, and how can we employ them here locally to make sure that we are assessing and making sure that children are getting through some of those traumatic experiences over time. And then lastly, Prop 56, it's an additional, I think about $25 million toward prevention, early intervention programs for children impacted by the child welfare system. And again, as all these dollars and investments are going around, how do we make sure that there is a local initiative to know how to connect with those things, again, to make sure they're dispersed to the children?
So I think that's your phone alarm ringing over there?
That's not me, better not.
Oh, that, I bet it is. That's so funny. Thank you for the question. And there's not a easy talk to this person, do that, do this kind of answer. It's just not. The power of this room is making sure you all leave here with the business cards of at least 5, 6 other people you didn't know and the nonprofits that they're running, so you all stay connected. You know, I am clear that my job is to pass an on-time budget that reflects the values of my district, to introduce and pass legislation that meets the same criteria, but it's also to follow up on how those new policies are operationalized. And that, for us, at our level, can be tricky. Case in point, through the budget last year, we were able to put some significant funding, once again, into departments of public health across the state to address the African American infant mortality and morbidity rate in California. We introduced, we got the money in the budget with a certain expectation it would roll out, and State Department of Public Health perhaps had a different interpretation. And so it was our ongoing engagement to really encourage them to don't sit on the money for a year trying to figure out what to do. Let's get the money into the communities and the county departments of public health that are poised and ready and have programs. And so, you know, it takes ongoing work on our part as legislators and staff to make sure that that's happening. But we can't do it by ourselves. I know many people in the room, many of you are new faces, new organizations that I'm not familiar with. And so it's also up to you to pay attention, understand what's happening, to reach out to us if there's a hiccup. Reentry dollars has been a bone of contention now for a number of years. My colleague, Mr. Jones Sawyer, who chairs the Public Safety Budget Subcommittee is very proud of the work and the dollars he's been able to get into the budget process. And there are many reentry nonprofit organizations who are saying, but it's going to counties, it's going to probation, it's not coming to the community-based organizations who are doing the real work. Like I said, there's no easy answer, but it's networking, knowing who's doing similar work, following the bills, connecting with the authors' offices to find out what organizations were a part of the group that brought them the language. It's not easy, but it really requires all of that work individually, I think, to make sure that you're at the table and have access to resources that you need to do the work you want to do.
Hi, Senator Mitchell. Hi, Joe. Thank you very much for putting this together. I'm Carmine Manicone with Westside Regional Center. For those of you who don't know, the Westside Regional Center is part of 21 regional centers that statewide serve over 300,000 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And Senator Mitchell's been a staunch advocate for our DD population, and we really thank you for that. And we seem to have a lot of momentum going for an increase to our budget this year. I actually wanted to ask you your advice on something else.
Okay?
On housing. I know there's a lot of, there's initiatives for housing, for homeless, and for veterans, but folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities aren't getting a piece of that pie, and they're hurting. In our area, there's been a lot of redevelopment, which is wonderful. Playa, Inglewood, but the bastions of affordable rent areas are just disappearing. And I'm hearing regularly from the folks that we serve that their leases are up and the landlords are increasing their rent $500, $600, $700 a month. So finding affordable housing for our folks is just becoming near impossible, at least in West Side's area. How do you advise us to advocate to have our folks included in those discussions and included in those tax incentives?
So you'll be happy to know that the final witness in public testimony yesterday at our housing and homelessness hearing raised your very issue,
Okay.
your exact issue. And I think it's going to be important. I'll get you who that was. It was one of
my colleagues?
One of your colleagues represents, the association of all of you. It will be important that you bring that forward during the budget subcommittee process. It was a fascinating hearing yesterday, and it was 4.5 hours, so I'm not going to ask you to watch it online. I wouldn't do that to you. But the second panel it opened with Department of Finance and LAO, laying out what's in the current proposal. The second panel was local perspective. It was Mayor Michael Tubbs from Stockton. It was Phil Ansell from LA County. And the third person was?
It was Doug Shoemaker?
Shoemaker,
I wanna say? And he was-
with
Yeah.
Mercy Housing, and he's chair of the California Coalition on Housing, blah, 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 blah. It was a fascinating, deep, honest conversation about housing insecurity, homelessness, and our collective response to those populations. And what kind of California we all want to live in. And it may not have got picked up on screen, but as we were switching panels, I said, we talk about we have a visceral response when we step over people on the sidewalk. But we also must acknowledge the fact that we also all possess bias, implicit or explicit. And while housing for veterans is a much easier sale than housing for other communities and other populations of
understand
people
that.
in need, it's an easier sale.
Yep.
And so these are the conversations we have to continue to have. So I would suggest we'll get to you who your colleague was who came up and made the testimony, and you all perhaps need to go to the subcommittee to make your case and talk about what percentage needs to be carved out and for whom. It's not too late, and it's a viable argument.
Yeah, and I would just add, just from the state level perspective, is that there is, an opportunity right now because there is a lot of focus on this. I think the governor came out with strong signals, and if you look, there's about 1.3 billion that he has,
Yeah.
or 1.8 billion listed here around housing and homelessness proposals, and that's building off of significant investments the last couple of years from the legislature. But he's also came out with some pretty strong statements on actually trying to really do some significant things to address this issue. And it was, you know, you could tell at yesterday's hearing. I mean, folks are fed up and engaged, and this is an opportunity to be a part of that conversation, especially as there are resources and significant policy discussions going on right now in Sacramento.
Great. Okay, thank you
So
both.
if you go, look at the second panel. It was powerful. It was powerful.
I will. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Kathy Gott. I serve on the LA County Commission on Disabilities, and I have 2 adult sons with autism, both productive members of our community. And I want to just acknowledge the gentleman before me is with the Regional Center, and how incredibly fortunate we are, those of us who have had children or loved ones with developmental disabilities, to live in our state where we have this community-based system. And for the last 50 years, there's so much success and momentum, and it makes me want to cry just how incredibly, I don't know where we would be without bringing these services into our lives.
I agree.
And so my question for you is relative to Los Angeles. So it's not, it varies in the state. And that is the raising of the minimum wage and how it has impacted our service providers.
Yes.
And I am a vendor for 3 different agencies in our area that serves people with autism and other intellectual disabilities. And our rate is so much higher. It's one of, and also in, I know San Francisco, you know, there's the big cities. And but they made this unilateral raise, but it doesn't yet meet, and people are closing their doors. We're
Yes.
cutting back. We
Yes.
can't serve the number of clients.
Right.
How do we address this issue in the state, but it's kind of an LA issue? Do you have any suggestions?
It's not just an LA issue, it's an issue across the state. And just for the other folks to understand, because it's not only impacting DD vendors in the
Right.
community. So when the state voted to increase minimum wage, there are certain wages or reimbursement rates that we set. IHSS, DD, early care and education, their reimbursement rate for child care providers is set in the budget. And so when we made this universal, you know, declaration that we didn't do our part to adjust the reimbursement rates of salaries or contracts that we set in keeping with minimum wage.
Just all
Now,
break
because
even.
it's,
That's all.
right, so
Nobody's
because
getting
it's now the
rich here.
law, people who employ people who provide these services now have to pay minimum wage, but we're paying them in their contracts to run these programs isn't at that level. It's a horrific catch-22, so it's broader
Okay.
than DD. And the state's gonna have to figure it out. We've talked about it, now into year 2 or something, and I'm clear it's gonna have to be adjusted. Whether we make the adjustment for all impacted people at once, probably not. And I think that's where politics comes into play.
Okay.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so it's those communities and service providers that are the best organized, that are consistent in their messaging, that are talking to the administration, the assembly, the Senate, everybody, will probably be the one that gets addressed first. That's the politician in me
So it's
speaking.
reasonable in this time period right now, before May, to,
Have those conversations.
Okay.
No guarantee that it would happen this year, but it is reasonable within this time period to continue to bring the issue
squeak.
forward and to squeak, right, to squeak. Because
do that.
it is an issue that we're clear is a problem, because we've heard about it pretty consistently now for more than a year.
Thank you.
Anything you would add to that?
I'll just add to one of the comments you made at the end there of no guarantee it'll happen this year is don't let that discourage you from continuing.
Okay.
Because even as legislators, Senator Mitchell has worked on issues for years before she's able to to actually make some headway, and haven't been around a while now. I see that again and again. And the folks who are persistent, who don't take no for an answer, tend to end up actually making progress at some point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next question.
Hi, Senator Mitchell. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Julie Brooks, CEO, Woodcraft Rangers.
Yes.
After-school provider. So I'm going to piggyback off that question because you answered it beautifully. Thank you. Because I also think some of us, right, we are an after-school provider, summer provider. I have some of my colleagues in the field here from Big Brothers, Boys and Girls Club, my apologies, and Ellie's Best. And I think that to further complicate, some of us are results of noble ballot box budgeting that are then in tension with legislative measures around minimum wage, right? So, and find ourselves in this position of insolvency. So I do think it's a broad issue. It is specifically impacting the nonprofit sector who are de facto workforce agencies, right?
Agreed.
So, so thank you for looking at that. We really encourage the legislature to look at ensuring the solvency of current programs as well as looking at new exciting programs. And while there's a great need, we want to make sure that we can continue to do the great service that we do. So thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. My follow-up question is, how can we better engage families and families or those that we serve constituents to help to help bring their voices to the Capitol? We are a long distance away, so we can't always, right? But can you advise on how we can best do that?
And you probably aren't going to like the answer. But maybe some of you have not heard my story. I was at Crystal Stairs. We were looking at a $1 billion cut to subsidized childcare. We knew that the childcare provider community had a particular lens, but parents who were not going to be able to go to work because they could not have access to childcare had a different story to tell.
Yep.
And it was on an organized trip to Sacramento where we spent Saturdays through community voices, helping parents tell their stories, doing mock budget hearings so people would understand what the experience would be when they got there, took buses, went up there, found out that the chair of the budget subcommittee that was going to hear our issue, who had been a Los Angeles representative, had stepped down, and we were facing a budget subcommittee with no Los Angeles area representative, and I got pissed and said for the first time to myself, even in my own head, I should run for office, literally, in a budget hearing, fighting that very issue. And so it is up to you to organize the parents and the beneficiaries of the services you provide. And come visit us in our district offices when we're here on Fridays, or district office staff, or to participate in lobby days in Sacramento, or send me, as I would put on the dais every budget hearing for that first year. Early care and education group organized and gave me what they called a box of dreams. And I bought the box of dreams to the budget hearing and sat it on the dais every time. And there were letters from mothers, kids who talked about how they love their child care provider. Yeah. So you have to be creative and innovative and get your hustle on to come to Sacramento and figure out a way to be present.
Well, after
and
school
to remind us.
After School and Expanded Learning will be there on the 12th of March. So we are organizing a large-scale trip across the state.
Perfect.
So absolutely, we
do
understand
practice
that.
sessions.
Okay.
Don't be offended if you have to meet with staff instead of a member, because we get pulled in committees, but staff are my eyes and ears, as you can see with staff here. Don't be offended. Practice, get to your point, make your ask, have a leave behind. Those budgets and passbooks and my box of dreams were all memorable.
Yeah.
And so be creative in terms of what you leave so people will remember you. Legislators are human beings, and we will remember stories. Statistics we hear every day, and just like you will remember a statistic, but it's the story. that we used when I was doing this professionally to help a legislator walk for a minute in my shoes. You know, our tagline is, you know, childcare keeps California working. And we had to make sure that the policymakers, the Department of Finance understood, if you take childcare away, if you take after-school programs away, I cannot go to work.
Correct.
And so you have to find your issue and knock it home.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really
Appreciate it.
Hi, good afternoon. Megan Ortiz with the Institute of Popular Education of Southern California, IDEBSCA, and we are in the steering committee of the California Domestic Workers Coalition. And we're here actually with some of our members, Terry and Carmen, caregivers and house cleaners. So thank you for all of your support in all of our bills. And this year specifically, we're working on a budget ask, which is where my question is going. We know that many times there are well-intentioned and really important bills, legislation that passes, but we know the difference between legislation being passed and being implemented are two very different things.
Indeed.
So for example, you know, in 2016, we passed, with your support also, SB 1015, which ensured overtime for live-in caregivers in the state of California, which dealt with a huge disparity, right?
I remember that in Labor Committee.
Yes, so, yes, so do I. So I think, and this year we're asking for budget support so that within the Department of Labor Standards Enforcement, we can make that real, because the challenge is that while the law is on the books,
Right.
you know, there are 300,000 domestic workers in California, and that's probably a low estimate, and about 2 million employers, with that concentration here in Los Angeles, where we are. So I'd just love to hear advice on how do we work to make sure that there are budget asks with legislation that get passed either alongside together, or that later on make sure, like what we're doing this year, efforts that will pass to make legislation real. Thank you.
Can I get some hot tea, please? Thank you. Mr. Stepper, you want some water? What would you like? She was bringing water. Okay, thank you. Excellent question. Not an easy answer. We probably have no idea how many bills there are on the books that have great, ambitious, aspirational goals with no money. And sometimes that's the legislator's fault, because we pull the money out to get the bill through appropriations, because we're told you'll die in appropriations, you'll be held in suspense. And so sometimes that's the legislator's fault. Sometimes you pass the policy and you have to wait for a healthier general fund, and then you can come back and get the money. Sometimes you do a parallel track. I have done it where we've had a budget strategy and a bill, because the bill going through the legislative process helps educate people, helps build momentum, creates an opportunity for you to organize. And so they will, you know, it's a parallel track, and sometimes they meet up and sometimes they don't. And so all of those strategies have been both effective and ineffective. And it's up to you to figure out the timing, the year, the governor, the issue du jour, what you're competing against. All of those things factor in. I had an issue, maximum family grant through the CalWorks program, that the governor in year one said, Holly, you got me on the policy, I agree. It's the price tag. It took us 4 years, Luann, 4 or 5 years. And so there wasn't any disagreement on the policy. Everybody agreed that it was a horrible, hateful policy. But to reverse it was going to cost $200 million. So you have to do it all. You have to figure out the strategy, and the strategy that works this year may not be the strategy you use next year.
I'll just add that, I mean, just to emphasize that, because oftentimes, as Senator Mitchell mentioned earlier, that the trailer bills will enact policies, and the budget's really just items of appropriation. That's how the money is actually getting allocated out. And so to the extent that you can have that policy bill going. At the same time, you have a budget ask. That's probably the best case. And then eventually, but just know that the options are, because it's really about having that policy discussion, but if you can get the budget ask taken care of, then there's always that option to either, one, just move the legislative changes into the budget process, or you can always make tie the money in the budget to the enactment of that legislation.
Yeah, we did the parallel track last year. The legislative piece passed, the budget did not. So, so yeah. But thank you so much, and thank you for your continued support.
Thank you for coming today. Yes.
Hello, Senator Mansfield.
Hi.
Just like the rest of everyone, thank you for this opportunity. I have a multi-point question. I think you can answer it with one single answer. Number one is, my name is Chad Williams. I'm from a for-profit organization, Brownstone Entertainment. I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations in providing mentorships for kids and so forth of the nature. I already made that contact.
Okay, great. Did you see? I was like, oh my God, he left. He left. Okay, perfect.
I made that contact.
Perfect.
But one of the biggest frustrations being in my position is we've got roughly 52% of our budget goes to education. However, less than 20% of that goes to educating in the arts. As a matter of fact, they're removing the arts out of most of our schools, and then they're adding I can't think of the name of the schools, but they're not, like you got LAUSD, but then they've got the other schools, the charter schools.
Charters.
That comes in, and the problem is charter teaches directly how to pass tests. And please, if you're a charter person, please, I'm not bashing you, so I don't want you to think this. But I've been a part of both systems. I've worked with both systems, and what you have is kids who, when they're home, they're constantly on the video game. When they go to school, they're hammered with education, but there's no meeting and social anywhere in the middle. And one of the things that the arts does is it helps bridge that gap. The problem that we have for people in my position is we spend almost every penny we have in terms of our profit for these organizations when there's a budget that's set up that should be helping these kids get to this. But then there's the gatekeepers that we have to go and battle just to say, hey guys, you're killing our kids out here. And I'm even talking about the gatekeepers' kids, because the kids are what's we're really affecting. I'm very familiar with Crystal Stairs and what they've had to deal with. I'm from a family of educators. So I understand. My question, I guess, is how do we bridge the gap of for-profit organizations who really, really want to reach back to the communities and help the kids, and then the nonprofit organizations, because there's a barrier that you have to keep between the for-profit and the nonprofit. How do we bridge that gap to where we can come and provide these mentors? And I work with Bill Duke is one of the gentlemen that I work with. How do we bridge these gaps to get these mentors to these organizations and come up with a funding source that's coming out of our pockets through taxes to help do this? Thank you.
I'm not sure why we've decided we were going to have this on a Friday afternoon. People come with all these hard questions at the end of the week. I needed this Monday morning when I'm fresh and firing. So I don't know about the barrier you perceive between for-profits and nonprofits. I don't see that.
I get, in general, the commingling of funds, I guess.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Commingling of funds is
Okay.
what I'm saying. So I can't just take money and give to a nonprofit organization because that nonprofit organization has a way that it has to spend its money specifically based on their charter.
Well, all the nonprofit organizations in here need to make sure they get his card before you leave. If he's got money to give, and you all figure out how to receive it and do some programming. What I will say is, as I have discovered in policy making, so Hannah, you're going to join the line, and you're going to be the end of the line, because it's 4:30, and I just want to honor everyone. That's going to be the cutoff. Beautiful. And I'll try to keep my answers a little more concise. There's a pendulum swing in anything. We're experiencing a pendulum swing right now at the federal level in terms of perspective. There's a pendulum swing. And so there was a pendulum swing. Kids weren't testing proficient, and the K through 14 powers that be said we've got to teach to the test, and we've got to graduate, and we've got to do A, B, C, and D. And the pendulum has begun to swing back. We're looking at the Arts Council getting increased funding. We're looking at people acknowledging the fact that it's not just the 3 R's plus STEAM, but arts has a role to play in terms of brain development and all that. And so, you know, government is reactionary. We don't innovate, you all innovate. Private sector innovates, the nonprofit sector innovates, and we react. And so, private sector, through a ballot initiative, did Prop 10, did the 0 to 5 brain research. Government slowly reacted. So, you know, you have to keep pushing, finding partners in the nonprofit sector that you can partner with. There are nonprofits that can take private sector money and not commingle it with their government and their other money. That can be done. Unfortunately, government tends to fund in silos. So when I was at Crystal Stairs, I would be flush in one budget, and another area I was having to fundraise for because I couldn't use the money over here for this service. So that's common in the nonprofit world, but that doesn't mean that I can't partner with a for-profit organization and fund some new project. Government looks to the world of philanthropy to augment what we do. Government is clear that we don't have enough money to solve all the problems. Government looks to private-public partnerships to create a California that we all want to live in. We expect that to happen. Now, philanthropy sometimes says we don't want to supplant. Government needs to do government's job, and we get that. But there really aren't these walls that prevent you from supporting one another. And the pendulum is swinging. Government has begun to figure, and educators have begun to figure, that we've got to look at the soft skills, the human skills, the skills that employers want to see. They don't want someone who can just do this all day. They want someone who is a person who can problem solve. And so the pendulum is swinging, and we're trying to do better.
Hi, I want to thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. My name is Brianna Miles, and I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Southern California and a proud supporter of Planned Parenthood. So essentially, pretty obvious, the services of Planned Parenthood are extremely important. It's important to provide reproductive health care and reproductive education to youth and communities that need it. So I'm wondering if you are supportive of Gavin Newsom's plan to invest, or proposal to invest $100 million into reproductive health care through family packs and Medicare.
Yes.
Medi-Cal.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Perfect. Love it.
And if you've looked at my voting history in the past, you would know that that's not a surprise. Absolutely.
Hello, thank you for your time and the presentation. Craig Pulsfer from APLA Health. We used to be AIDS Project LA, so we're one of the oldest HIV service providers in LA County, and then became a FQHC 3 or 4 years ago now. So we have 3 health centers, including one in Baldwin Hills.
I was at your ribbon cutting. Now, what's the new name?
APLA Health.
APLA Health.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just a quick general budget question. You'd mentioned earlier kind of these final negotiations. I don't know if they still call it the Big Five.
Yeah, no, they don't. But
okay. So even if your item passes out of the Assembly and the Senate and then goes into this mysterious negotiation, which has never been clear to me kind of what that looks like behind closed doors. And what I've been told is that, it matters where your issue falls on the priority list of various caucuses or members and folks on the budget committees. So just wondering if you can shed some light on what it looks like in that room and how those final decisions are made.
You want to answer first, and I'll answer?
I'm not sure if it's in one meeting, one room, but it's not the Big Five anymore. There's no longer a 2/3 vote requirement, as we talked about earlier. So it's really the leaders of both houses and the governor who make the final agreement, and so they'll make that final agreement. Most of the legwork to get to that final agreement are done by their respective budget directors. So the director of finance, the pro tem has a budget director, Chris Woods. Shout out to Chris Woods.
Hey, Chris Woods.
and the Speaker of Assembly as a budget director. So those three are the kind of the primary players in terms of doing the legwork of getting all the ducks in a row to get a final package for the governor and the leaders of both houses to approve. I would say that you are correct, though, just where you fall on priorities, but I mean, it's not so much of each caucus doesn't say, doesn't really go down and rank everything. It's, priorities are priorities, and caucuses are trying to fight for them, and it's just a matter of those conversations of what what all three entities can agree to.
The Big Five, does everybody know what that is? People, you just scared to raise your hands. I don't know. Thank you for shaking your hand. No, thank you. So it's almost like, the movies. The Big Five was the term used for the governor, the speaker, and the pro tem, and the leaders of the minority party, the Republican minority leader in the Senate and the Assembly. And back when, before that proposition, when we needed a full 2/3 to pass the budget, we needed some Republicans to vote on the budget too. So that's how the minority leaders got in the room when Democrats were in charge. And I think there was a time when they would go in a back room, and if it was Schwarzenegger's day, they were probably smoking cigars, and the Big Five kind of cut the final deal. That doesn't happen anymore. We don't need 2/3, quite frankly. And so the negotiations are really with the administration and the leader, whoever the party leader is, of the two houses. And what Mr. Steppenshaw said earlier is, what has happened is those conversations kind of happen simultaneously with conference committee for a variety of reasons. One, because of the new 72-hour in print rule. When you consider, and the budget has to be passed by June 15th rule. See, before, when those negotiations would drag on, there was no hard stop. But when the voters said, legislators, you won't get paid if there's no budget by June 15th, I'm going to be voting on a budget on June 15th. Not only do we not get paid, we can't recoup it. And so, with the May revise comes out May 15th, we have 30 days to get a budget off the Senate floor, the Assembly floor, go through conference committee, get negotiated, and have a deal and a vote on June 15th. So that Big Five, that is no longer because of actions that voters have taken with the ballot initiatives that have really kind of changed the culture and the dynamic in which we're all working. So it really now is sometimes simultaneous during conference committee, which makes your work harder. You don't just get to target 5 people. You have to do everything you talked about, both houses, the caucuses, to attempt to continue to work to prioritize your issue. And again, I would say, I said earlier, I think it's incumbent upon you all to learn and understand other pressure points on the budget. I think when people come to me and say, Senator Mitchell, I saw that budget hearing on the fires, and I understand the impact it's going to have on all of us as Californians, and this is what, we all have to be better informed about what all of our brothers and sisters across the state are facing. All of these issues are priorities. And so I think you have to do all of that. And your regular full-time job, too, I know. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Marilyn Holly with Disability Rights California with a healthcare portfolio. My question is how and strategies for getting the LAO to book savings when costing a bill or proposal. But the most kind of illustrative, there's like a whole cohort of individuals in nursing facilities who don't need to be there and don't want to be there, but if they could access IHSS, but they just can't figure out how to live in the community on $600 a month. But so that is sort of like the extreme end. But there's a lot of other places along the line where when things are costed, there is not looking at, booking savings that would result. So strategies for addressing that problem.
And finance doesn't do it either, and the legislators ask them that all the time. You want to respond?
I mean, I say finance probably even less so than the analysts, although they try. I mean, I think that, because it's sometimes it's a tricky one. I think that from what I've seen, getting your, if it's a matter of being able to encourage the legislative analysts to do that type of analysis, is really getting your legislator engaged in it and them putting the pressure on the LAO to do that analysis, that level of analysis for them.
I mean,
And
even-
Marilyn, let me make one commitment to you. When we went through the hiring process with this LAO, the JLBC is a bicameral, bipartisan committee. I formed a subcommittee, bicameral, bipartisan, because the hiring decision has to be unanimous of this committee. I thought, how am I going to get everybody to agree on one person? And we had a subcommittee, and we had healthy conversations about our desires for the future of the LAO. And people had frank conversations. And one thing we all said was we needed to be a closer partner with the LAO to communicate to them, not just in budget hearing, but to talk about the kind of work and the kind of support we need and want from the LAO. And I agreed to convene a JLBC hearing as soon as we hired a new LAO to have this conversation. That hearing is scheduled for March something. I think it's the end of March. We hired a LAO. He started the 1st of February. And my commitment to you is, in this hearing, I will pose that question.
Great, thank
That
you.
it's an issue that people want to know, and can that be a more integral part of the work the LAO does? And I'll get back to you and tell you what he says.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Patrick McFarland with Crystal Stairs. I want to thank you for this workshop. I've learned a lot, and I know our Community Voices members will show this in our workshops, and I know that they'll get a lot out of this. A lot of them can't make it this time, but it's great, and we'll definitely share that. So I wanted to ask a question about the process for us in advocacy. Let's say that we know most members of the legislature. Let's say we know folks in the governor's office, but we don't know members of budget subcommittees. Would it be a better use of our time to really get to know those subcommittee members and share with them our budget request? Or should we spend our time and our energy going to the members that we do know and asking them to advance our request to the subcommittee members?
I think so Pink Scarf says you have to do both. What I would say, you all love to come see me when you come to Sacramento. And I say, I'm not sure why you're in here talking to me. And I appreciate that you want to reinforce those relationships with the people you know. But those subcommittee chairs are critical. They are. And so you have to meet with the people whose district you're providing the service in, but you have to understand and learn those subcommittee chairs, because if I'm not on that subcommittee, I could love you all day long and not be on top of when those subcommittees are going to hear your issue and when they're going to take action. So you have to do both.
I would just add on, in long lines of doing both, is that it's important for you to engage with subcommittee chairs. As mentioned, they're the ones who are going to hear it in the committee and take an action on it. But it's also important for the members that you do have that are championing your causes to also stay engaged. The last couple of years, a number of members have actually submitted budget requests to subcommittee chairs. So to the extent that you have members who are willing to do that for you, that is an option that you should take advantage of.
Thank you.
Hi, some bit too. Hi for me. Hi, my name is Tracy Beltran. I work with SCOPE, Strategic Concept and Organizing and Policy Education. We are in South LA, and we do a lot of leadership development for folks to kind of self-organize and advocate for issues that they care about. Thank you for holding this. We do this with our members beginning in January, talking about the process, kind of breaking down the budget, and getting our own priorities to see if they really align with what the governor and the legislator is doing. I think questions that have arisen from these conversations have been about
inclusion of members, of community members in deciding how these funds are spent. So just thinking about different models around participatory budgeting, what are opportunities that do you see in the state of California to kind of move us in that direction or bring those, this statewide conversation to more a local space in like LA, for example, creating models. Wondering if you see any opportunities there?
I don't know structurally because of that tight time frame you saw, but nothing would stop my colleagues from having a session like this. I spoke at a Democratic club at their invitation about 2-3 weeks ago where we went through the exercises of how you would shape the voting. You know, I think it's my responsibility as your elected representative to have my finger on the pulse in terms of what my community sees and prioritizes. And so I think if you found this of value, you know, talking to other elected officials and asking them. You don't have to be on the budget committee to convene a hearing to talk about the budget. I remember when I was running a nonprofit, then I think Assembly member Mark Ridley Thomas, who wasn't a budget committee member, would have budget town halls in this very room and would bring the experts, the LAO or whoever here to educate us and talk to us about, you know, what was in the budget. So I think nothing stops electeds from doing this. It doesn't necessarily have to be a structural part of that overall process. It should be what we do in terms of engaging our constituents. Encouraging people to, for me, I think the path of least resistance, what we can get done quicker and more efficiently, is educating people about the process and taking scope and the people you've trained and infuse them in the process in terms of reaching out to their elected officials, running for office themselves, doing all that they can to kind of inform the process as it stands today. You know, I don't see in the foreseeable future a different structure. In fact, the structure's gotten tighter in terms of the timeline because of those propositions we talked about. And so I think the kind of work Scope is doing, community voices, these kinds of town halls is what we all need to do to make sure everybody understands the budget process and tries to engage in it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments, Mr. Steppenshaw? Welcome to the 30th Senate District. We appreciate you coming.
Yes, and just thanks for having me.
I'm going to ask people, you see all these brochures, all of you know another nonprofit leader that wasn't here today. Take one and commit to give it to someone. It's got our contact information. Will my staff wave your hands? Hannah, Sonia, Helen, Luann, Armane. You should know Team Mitchell in the district because they're my eyes and ears here when I am in Sacramento, and reach out to them. They should know you. You should know them. And we really appreciate you spending your Friday afternoon learning about your state budget. Thank you for coming.